Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. My name is Anthony Carter, and I am 46 years old. 3 weeks ago, I learned that my wife, Rochelle, was cheating on me. I did not go looking for it. I did not hire anyone. Her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and I glanced at it the way you glance at a flickering light in a familiar house. A message from someone named Quentin flashed on the screen. He wrote that he could not wait for their Miami getaway. Just the two of them and the beach. I stood there a long moment, coffee in hand, listening to the patter of our bathroom water upstairs, trying to understand how 23 years of marriage could split open in a second because of a careless moment and a forgotten phone. The strange truth of discovering your spouse's affair is that life does not stop. You have choices. You can explode, shout, demand answers, or you can think. I chose to think. That morning, I did not confront her. That night, I did not raise my voice. I went quiet and began to pay attention. I watched. I learned. And what I learned made me feel hollow. This was not a recent mistake or a momentary lapse. It had roots. It had weekends disguised as book clubs. It had late nights with friends who never existed. It had lies that stretched into months. Quentin was from her yoga studio. Divorced, no children, according to what I could piece together. He drove a leased luxury sedan he could show off, the kind of car that hints at success without requiring the responsibility of ownership. He was everything I was not, or so the messages implied. I did not want to believe it. I did not want to see any of it. But the messages kept arriving, and the picture became impossible to ignore. I started taking notes. Instead of confronting Rochelle, I planned. I called my friend Curtis Malone, who worked at a firm downtown. Not to start a war. Not yet. Just to understand what my options were if the worst was true. Curtis told me to slow down, gather proof, and keep a level head. I listened. I took photos of key documents. I checked our financial statements and created a quiet record of every irregularity. The word patience became my lifeline, and for 3 weeks, I lived in that calm, cold place where a decision is made long before a word is spoken. Each day of those 3 weeks felt like a page torn from a book I thought I loved. Rochelle lied to my face with an ease that shocked me. She returned from supposed book club meetings smelling like a stranger's cologne. She smiled with a practiced warmth that now felt staged. Meanwhile, I found a flight confirmation to Miami tucked into an email she must have thought I would never see. I heard her planning on the phone, telling Quentin how easily she could convince me it was a women's weekend with Asia and Camille. The irony cut deep. She believed I was clueless. That belief became my advantage. I helped her pack, holding the suitcase while she debated whether to bring another dress. She kissed me goodbye with a tenderness that had always convinced me. She said she would miss me. She told me Asia and Camille were picking her up for the airport. I walked her to the curb and helped load her bag into the rideshare, knowing full well that Quentin would likely be waiting at the gate for the same flight. She squeezed my hand and said I deserve a quiet weekend. I told her that she deserved her vacation too. She texted me hours later, right on schedule, probably while Quentin was pulling their luggage from the carousel in Miami. My phone buzzed with her message that I should not worry because it was an innocent women's trip. I stared at that word, innocent, and felt something inside me go cool and precise. I had waited 3 weeks for the right line, the one that would remove the mask. I typed my response slowly, making sure nothing about it trembled. I told her that I hoped she and Quentin enjoyed the island. I pressed send and set my phone down on my desk. The phone rang 30 seconds later. Then again. Then over and over until the screen filled up with missed calls and messages stacked one on top of the other like dominoes. By the time I left work an hour later, I counted 17 missed calls and 43 texts. The tone of her words shifted from defensive to pleading to panicked. She wrote that she could explain that it was not what I thought, that she loved me, that she was coming back. And then one message arrived that told me exactly how much the ground had tilted beneath her. Flight booked, landing at O'Hare, 11:47 at night. Please do not leave me. I drove out of the parking garage and watched the traffic lights wash the hood of my car in yellow and red. I knew where she was and what was happening inside her. I did not relish it. I did not savor it. But I did recognize that a balance had shifted. For 3 weeks, she had believed I was a step behind. Now I was 10 steps ahead, and she knew it. I headed to a meeting that Curtis had arranged at Harper & Associates. If the truth had to upend my life, then I would meet it prepared. Attorney Sterling met me with a firm handshake. She was not interested in hand-holding. She asked how long I had known, and I told her 3 weeks. I handed over the photos I had taken of account statements, mortgage documents, retirement accounts, and calendar entries. She flipped through them and nodded. She said I was doing everything right. She told me not to respond to Rochelle while the panic still had momentum. Desperation led to mistakes, and mistakes made the path cleaner. As we talked, my phone continued to light up. I turned it face down on the table. Attorney Sterling told me we would file preliminary paperwork at once. She explained what would likely happen to the accounts, what to expect if Rochelle tried to move money, and how to structure the timeline of separation. None of it felt like victory. It simply felt necessary. She said that the person who did not cheat has leverage because the truth stays on that person's side. I did not want leverage. I wanted my life back. But the past would not return just because I wanted it. When I left Harper & Associates, the city felt newly hollow, like all the buildings had lost their sound. It was nearing 8 in the evening. My phone showed 67 missed calls and more than 140 unread messages. The tone had shifted again. Rochelle wrote that she was on the plane. She insisted that we talk face to face. She promised clarity. She wrote that she had made a mistake. She wrote that she could fix it if I would just pick up. I drove home the long way, past the quiet row houses and the corner store that stayed open late, wondering how I had missed what other people might have seen from a mile away. The house felt unfamiliar when I walked in, as if a fault line had cut through the living room and furniture had slid half an inch away from where it had lived for years. I poured a drink and sat in my recliner, the one Rochelle always complained about. She said it ruined the living room. That night it felt perfect. My phone rang again, and I answered. Her voice rushed out in a hush. She asked why I had not responded. She said she landed in a few hours. She begged me not to do anything without hearing her side. I asked how Quentin was handling the sudden change in plans. She paused so long I could hear the dull hum of the airplane. She asked what I wanted her to say. I told her I wanted her to stop insulting my intelligence. I told her she had looked me in the eye and lied every day for months. I told her the goodbye kiss that morning felt different now that I knew who was meeting her at the airport. She said it was not supposed to happen like this, and I asked whether she meant the affair or getting caught. She said both. I told her what would happen when she returned. We would have one conversation. Then she would pack. Then she would find somewhere else to stay while we worked through the legal details. She sounded stunned. She asked if I had really spoken to a lawyer. I told her I filed preliminary paperwork hours earlier and froze our joint accounts an hour after that. She whispered a question that squeezed whatever compassion I had left. She asked if I had known before she left. I told her I knew from the moment I saw the message about Miami. I told her I had known about every lie since. The call ended soon after. She said she would be home. She wrote that she would land at 11:47. I poured another drink and opened my laptop. I searched for Quentin's wife because somebody should tell her that Florida had not called her husband for business. I located her in less than 20 minutes. Her name was Sabrina Brooks. She had been married to Quentin for 8 years. They had 2 children, and she worked part-time at a dental clinic. Her most recent post wished her husband a safe trip for an important conference. The word important tugged at me like a loose nail that catches your sleeve. I did not want vengeance. I wanted truth to stand. I stepped outside for air and listened to the cicadas that had set up a chorus along our block. My neighbor's porch lights cast small domes of yellow on trimmed lawns. This is the kind of street where people wave when they bring in their mail. I had thought that safety meant permanence. That evening I realized safety means honesty. Without it, a home is just a roof over secrets. The rideshare headlights swept into our driveway at 11:52, 5 minutes later than she said. Rochelle stepped out slowly and looked smaller than she had that morning. She used her key and walked in without knocking. I had expected hesitation. Instead, She dragged her small bag inside like it weighed as much as all of her choices at once. She came into the living room and kept her distance. She said we needed to talk. I told her she needed to listen. She lowered herself onto the edge of the couch. Her hair was disheveled. Her makeup was smudged, and the polished composure that had been her armor for years was gone. I told her I knew about the yoga studio. I knew about the weekends that were not with Asia. I knew about the stashed hotel receipts and the rideshare logs that funneled toward the same downtown address. She asked how long I had known, and I told her again, 3 weeks. I told her I was not angry in the way she would expect. I was calm because truth had arrived, and relief follows truth like a shadow. She asked what would happen now. I said consequences. I told her I had filed. I told her the accounts were frozen, pending review. I told her she would find somewhere else to stay while we sorted out everything through the lawyers. She told me I could not kick her out of her own house. I reminded her that I had bought the house before we married and that she had declined joint ownership because she did not want the responsibility. Her face changed when the weight of that reality landed. She asked if I would tell Sabrina. She said Quentin's wife did not deserve this devastation. She said there were children involved. I told her that Sabrina did deserve the truth because I had deserved it too. Rochelle asked me not to destroy another family. I said that I did not destroy anything. I was revealing what had already been broken. She put her face in her hands and asked whether there was anything left to save. I told her the only thing left to save was dignity, and that required honesty she had not offered me for months. The next morning, I woke at 6 to the sound of her packing downstairs. I brewed coffee. The smell made the kitchen feel like it belonged to me again. I sat and looked at a photograph of us from a year after we married, when we were still learning each other's pacing, the way we rested our hands on the backs of chairs, the way we smiled when the other one entered a room. We had been true then. Somewhere along the way, that truth had thinned and then snapped. My first call was to Sabrina's workplace. I introduced myself and asked to be transferred to her line. I told her I had news about her husband. She wanted to know who I was. I told her my name and that I would not tell her anything unless she could safely take a moment to verify what I would say. She said she could step into a break room. I told her that Quentin had not flown to a conference. He had flown with my wife. I said I had proof of months of contact. Silence held the line for a long run of seconds. She said Quentin had worked late on a project. She said he had shown her a conference website. I asked her to check the date. I suggested she look at his location data and card statements. I told her I was not asking for belief, just verification. She went quiet, and I heard faint typing as if the world had narrowed to a screen in her hand. When she returned, her voice was somewhere far away from where it had been a minute earlier. She said the conference was not scheduled until October. She thanked me and ended the call. My next call was to Rochelle's sister, Bethany. They had always been close. Bethany had supported us through rough patches that now felt trivial compared to this. I told Bethany the truth before Rochelle could recast it. At first, she resisted. She told me Rochelle would have said something if she were unhappy. I told her that unhappiness is not always the reason people betray vows. Sometimes it is recklessness that masquerades as adventure. I told her I had proof that spanned 3 weeks and years of intimacy turned into data points. When I hung up, Rochelle came to the kitchen. She was holding 2 suitcases and wearing the drained expression of someone who finally understood this was not an argument to win, but a reality to inhabit. She asked where she was supposed to go. I told her that it was not my problem. She asked whether she could stay with Bethany. I told her she could try. I told her that I had called Bethany already. Rochelle's shoulders dropped as if a string had been cut inside her. She asked whether I had called Sabrina. I told her that I had. She said I had destroyed everything. I said I had told the truth. There is a difference that is more than semantic. She sat limply at the table and stared at the refrigerator as if an answer could be found among magnets and reminders. My phone rang with a number from Miami. I answered. It was Quentin, his voice sharp and panicked. He asked what I had told his wife. I told him I had told her the truth, which is all that should ever have existed between spouses. He said I did not understand the situation. I told him that I understood precisely that he had slept with my wife. He told me that things were complicated. I said that the complication existed only because he had chosen to do what he did. He said Sabrina was threatening to leave, and I told him she had every right to. He said I had ruined his life. I said he had ruined his life. I had only removed the illusion that it was something else. He told me I did not know what I was doing. I said I had done exactly what was necessary. He hung up, and silence returned to the kitchen, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Rochelle watched me with a face that searched for a door where there was only a wall. She asked about our marriage. I asked what marriage she meant. The one with the vows we had exchanged in front of our families, or the one she had constructed in secret with weekends and whispered calls. She said it was not the same. I told her that she had made her choice, and now we had to live with it. I told her all communication would move through our lawyers. She lifted her suitcases and said she would call when she knew where she was staying. I told her not to bother. After she left, I changed passwords. I called the bank. I updated emergency contacts at work. I confirmed that our shared credit cards were paused and that our individual accounts were secure. I removed her as beneficiary from anything she was not legally guaranteed to receive. Curtis texted a check on me. He told me I was doing well, and I realized I felt a kind of steady calm that had been missing for weeks. The truth was a bitter drink, but it was clean. Bethany called to say Rochelle wanted to stay with her. She asked whether I would be all right with that. I told her I was not in the business of granting or denying Rochelle shelter. I told her I appreciated the courtesy and that my only request was distance and respect for the legal process. Bethany said she could not believe any of this. I told her to believe the evidence. I told her that I had spent 3 weeks collecting it while Rochelle believed she was 2 steps ahead. Later, I stood on our back porch and looked up at a sky emptied of all but a few distant planes crossing to somewhere I did not want to imagine. I tried to remember when Rochelle and I had lost the ability to tell each other we were unhappy. Perhaps we never had that ability. Perhaps we had only learned how to hide it. Either way, I knew this. My life was changing without any flourish, only paperwork, boxes, and the cold competence of phone calls. 2 days later, Rochelle walked into my office without an appointment. My assistant buzzed me, and before I could say no, curiosity made me agree. Rochelle looked worn down, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes shadowed, her hair pulled back in a rush. She said we needed to talk. I told her our attorneys needed to talk. She asked for 5 minutes. I agreed and watched the clock. She said that 23 years ought to count for something. I said they counted for 3 weeks of silence while I waited for her to choose truth and for a decision now that I was done waiting. She said she was scared. I told her she had not been scared when she kissed me before boarding a plane with someone else. She said fear is not a straight line. I told her that accountability is. She wanted to know what it would take to fix this. I told her there was nothing to fix because trust is either intact or not, and ours had shattered. She offered to block Quentin, to quit the yoga studio, to see a therapist. I told her those were steps she could take to become a better person for her next relationship. This one had ended because she had ended it. She called me cruel. I said that I was being honest. My phone buzzed with a text from Curtis saying Rochelle's lawyer had filed a counter, claiming emotional abandonment. I showed her the message. She flushed and said her attorney advised it. I told her it would not work. I had done the patient labor of documentation. I had timestamps for late nights. I had credit card statements. I had messages. I had travel receipts. I had evidence that emotion did not abandon this marriage. Deceit did. Rochelle stood to leave, then paused with a calculation that told me she had shifted tactics. She said there had been others before Quentin. She watched my face for collapse. I did not give her one. I asked what difference that was supposed to make to my decision. She said total truth could change things. I told her that total truth would have mattered months ago. Now, total truth was simply more weight on a scale that had already slammed down. She left without meeting my eyes. After she shut the door, I sat and tried to breathe in a way that did not count the years. Attorney Sterling called to ask how it had gone. I told her Rochelle suggested there had been others. She asked whether Rochelle offered details. I told her no, just leverage. Attorney Sterling said not to buy what was not being sold. Rochelle was seeking control in the only way left to her. She told me to remain steady, keep the process clean, and avoid any impulsive responses. I said I would. That evening, for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to relief, not because of Rochelle's pain and not because of Sabrina's devastation, but because the false life had been exposed. Pretending is a weight you do not know you carry until the pretense ends. The house felt lighter. Even the clock on the wall felt less loud. Days turned into a measured routine of legal appointments, notarized signatures, and deliberate separations that had nothing to do with furniture or dishes and everything to do with what had once been shared but would not be shared again. I learned how to live alone in a house that still contained traces of Rochelle. A scarf on a shelf, a mug she always favored, the faint smell of her perfume embedded into a hallway runner. I found that grief and relief can coexist without canceling each other. Curtis took me to lunch at a quiet place near his office. He asked how I was holding up. I told him I was better than I expected to be because plans are a form of mercy when your life threatens to scatter. He agreed and told me that clean endings are rare. He said I had done the work to create one. The server asked whether we wanted dessert. We both declined and returned to the kind of small conversation that hides the larger conversation you're not ready to have. A week after the office encounter, Sabrina sent a short message to the phone number I had used. She thanked me for telling her the truth and said she would handle the rest. She did not need more from me. I told her I wished her and her children peace. She said that peace would take time, but time is patient. I put the phone down and realized that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can offer is information, nothing more. My neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, watered her garden one afternoon while I carried a box of Rochelle's remaining items to my car for delivery to Bethany's house. Mrs. Johnson asked how I was doing. I told her I was all right. She said some of the folks on the block had suspected something was off for a while. The odd hours, the bags that appeared and reappeared, the awkward glances. I thanked her for not making gossip out of it. She said neighbors notice because they care. Then she turned the hose back to her flowers. Time is an odd friend in situations like this. It neither hurries nor delays. It simply keeps. I worked, I slept, I ran old routes through the neighborhood in early morning when the air was cool and the city felt kinder. I deleted photos I did not want and put the rest into a folder marked with a year. I did not open the folder again. One evening, Curtis texted with a small update. He said that Sabrina had decided to work on her marriage, but had instituted a legal separation soon after because of additional discoveries. He said that sometimes people cannot change what they refuse to see. I did not respond for a long moment, because the tragedy of a pattern is not less painful just because it is predictable. The yoga studio closed a month later. The news traveled in the way community news travels. Quiet talk in grocery store aisles, a line in a neighborhood newsletter, a post on a bulletin board near the coffee shop where Rochelle used to buy a latte after class. The owner could not manage the drama when word got out about inappropriate relationships between instructors and clients. I drove past the building and saw brown paper covering the windows. A sign said for lease. It looked like a stage after the show ends and the lights go black. On a Saturday, my friend Leon, who had noticed my absence from our group of old friends, invited me to a cookout. Rochelle had never been fond of Leon. She said he was too loud, too opinionated, too eager to laugh. Which is to say, he was himself. I went. People welcomed me with care, not fuss. Leon said he had missed me. He said I had become a ghost in my own life before any of this happened. He did not say it as judgment, just observation. I told him he was not wrong. We played a card game at a long table under a shade tree. Conversation moved like a gentle tide. Work stories, children's milestones, the price of everything, the way the seasons make you notice time's trick. At one point, Leon looked at me and asked how it felt to be in a quiet house. I told him it felt honest. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. Then he asked whether I was sleeping better. I told him yes, and that startled me to hear out loud. Rochelle and I communicated through attorneys who sent proposals, counterproposals, and questions about items that felt like memories masquerading as property. The division was equitable and unemotional, which I found strange and also comforting. The absence of drama made room for forward motion. We agreed on a fair split of savings and delineated what belonged to each of us. I kept the house, my retirement, and a small collection of vinyl records I had owned since college, but stopped playing because Rochelle thought the turntable took up too much space. In one of the last meetings, Rochelle's attorney suggested a mediated conversation. Attorney Sterling asked whether I wanted that. I said no. What was there to mediate? A line once crossed cannot be uncrossed. The mediator would be paid to name what I already knew. Trust was gone, and respect was broken. We declined. The process continued. In the second month after discovery, Rochelle called me from a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. She said she was living with Bethany for the time being. She said she had ended whatever remained with Quentin and wanted to say that she was sorry. She did not specify what for. I found myself wishing she would say the precise words, that she was sorry she lied, that she was sorry she chose to do what she did, that she was sorry for the ease with which she had deceived me. I did not call back. Sabrina reached out again a few weeks later. She asked if I would be willing to answer a single question. I agreed. She asked whether Rochelle had tried to minimize what happened by calling it a mistake that did not mean anything. I told her yes. She said Quentin had used the same phrase, mistake, as if the intention to commit it did not turn it into a chain of choices. She said the word insulted her intelligence. I told her I understood. We wished each other well and continued our separate, parallel recoveries. I thought of the word mistake often after that. We call something a mistake when we want to preserve a piece of ourselves from the truth. But affairs are not spilled milk. They are hours of planning, a choreography of deceit that becomes routine. I vowed never to use that word to displace responsibility in my own life. On a quiet Wednesday, Bethany called to ask if she could stop by to pick up a few items Rochelle had left. I said yes. When she arrived, she stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if the house itself made her ache. She apologized. She said she had not wanted to believe any of it, but she could not argue with what the last months had revealed. I told her I did not want her to apologize for her sister. We talked about family and about how love cannot save a person who does not choose to be saved. When she left, she hugged me as if she were saying goodbye to a version of me that had needed her concern. Work became a haven. Numbers behaved. Schedules yielded. The reports I managed told the truth. In the lunchroom, people watched me with the kind of care coworkers offer when they do not know what to say that will not make harm louder. I appreciated the silence. One afternoon, a junior analyst asked how I stayed so calm. I told her that calm is not the absence of anger. It is the decision not to be moved by someone else's chaos. That evening, I cleaned out the junk drawer in the kitchen, a place where expired coupons and orphan screws build a small civilization. I found a note Rochelle had left for me years earlier, one of those folded slips of paper that spouses leave from time to time, tucked into a lunch bag or slipped under a coffee mug. It said that she loved me and that our life mattered. For a moment, I felt the gravity of nostalgia tug me toward a false understanding of the present. I set the note aside and continued. Early in the third month, I received a call from Leon inviting me to a small weekend trip up to Milwaukee with a group to catch a baseball game and walk the river. I almost said no. The thought of sitting in a stadium surrounded by noise and strangers made my skin tense. But I said yes. The drive north felt like a gentle shaking awake. We ate simple food and traded small jokes and watched a game that ended without drama, which is a kind of mercy in its own right. On the drive back, Leon asked whether I'd started dating. I told him I had not. He said I should not rush to prove I was fine by replacing what had ended. He said I should let quiet teach me what I needed to hear. I told him I was not afraid of quiet. I told him quiet had saved me from saying things I cannot take back. The months became a measured march toward finality. Each step felt deliberate. Each signature felt like a door closing without slamming. Attorney Sterling kept me informed and shielded me from theatrics I did not need to witness. One afternoon, she called to say a court date had been set for the final decree. She asked me if I felt ready. I said readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. She said that sounded like something a person says when he has done the work to understand himself. Rochelle texted me the night before the hearing. She said that she was not sleeping and that she wished she could take it back. I put the phone face down on the bedside table. I did not respond. Sometimes silence is not punishment. It is just the only answer that honors the truth. The morning of the decree, I sat in my old recliner and looked at sunlight bend across the living room rug. I remember Rochelle telling me that the chair ruined the room. I realized the chair had outlasted our marriage. The thought should have made me laugh. Instead, it made me feel oddly grateful for a small, stubborn piece of comfort that had not asked me to be anyone other than myself. Courtrooms have their own gravity. People speak softly. Paper sounds louder than you think it should. The judge confirmed our settlement. Rochelle kept her personal belongings and half our savings. I kept the house, my retirement, and what I would call my dignity if I had wanted to be poetic about it. In truth, I kept my boundary. The gavel's echo was brief. And that was that. Curtis called afterward and asked how it felt to be officially single. I told him I felt like I could breathe the way you breathe after too long underwater. He asked if I had any regrets. I said no. Regret imagines that a different choice could have been made with the same information. I did not have different information then. I have it now. That evening, I walked the block, and neighbors I barely knew nodded as if they understood that endurance deserves acknowledgement. Mrs. Johnson waved from her porch. She asked if I needed anything. I told her I was all right. She told me to remember that people will show up if I ask. I thanked her and went inside to a house that no longer felt like a courtroom of memories. A week later, Sabrina texted that the final papers in her case were complete. She said Quentin had lost custody because of the lies and because of financial misconduct unrelated to me, but discovered because the truth has a way of illuminating more than itself. She said she was moving to Colorado to be near her parents. I told her I was glad she and the children would have support. She wrote that she hoped I would find happiness. I told her I had found something better, peace. Leon called to invite me to a small dinner at his place. He said his wife had made gumbo, and there would be just a few of us. I went and found myself laughing in a room that expected nothing of me beyond presence. Someone asked if I would join a weekend pickup basketball game at the community center. I said yes, and felt a version of myself return that I had thought was long gone. The next morning, I opened a bottle of wine that I had been saving for a special occasion and decided the end of a bad marriage qualified. I poured a glass and sat in my chair and watched the evening gather across the windows. The house was quiet, but it was a good quiet, not the brutal quiet of pretense, but the open quiet of truth. I raised my glass to consequences and to the way life heals on its own schedule. Sometimes healing comes with unexpected complications. A few days later, Rochelle asked if she could stop by with a box of items that belonged to me. I agreed because there was no point in refusing small decencies. She arrived with the box and stood in the doorway like a visitor in a museum that used to be hers. She said I looked well. I thanked her. She said she had found a small place through a friend of a friend and was trying to figure out what came next. I said I hoped she found what she was looking for. She asked whether I was seeing anyone. I said no. She said she had started talking to someone she met at a coffee shop. She said his name was Kendrick. I paused, then asked whether he knew about our divorce and the reasons for it. She said she had told him that our marriage had ended because we had grown apart. I told her that he deserved more of the truth than that if he was going to invest time in her. She said not everyone needs every detail. I said anyone who will share a life with you needs the details that define your character. She did not respond. After she left, I sat for a long time and thought about how honesty is not a currency you can spend only when it benefits you. It must be spent in the transactions that cost, too. Otherwise, it is not honesty. It is strategy. I felt a surge of gratitude for the people in my life who kept me anchored in this conviction. Curtis with his quiet counsel, Leon with his patient friendship, and even Sabrina, who had every right to hate me, but chose to honor the truth that had saved her from a longer lie. Weeks went by, and patterns settled. I worked. I cooked simple meals. I read in the evenings. I returned to listening to the records I had missed. The crackle at the start of a favorite album sounded like memory agreeing to coexist with the present without taking over the room. I slept. When I woke at 3 in the morning, I did not reach for my phone to check whether Rochelle had said she was working late. I no longer waited for excuses to become proof. In early autumn, Leon and I drove to a small town, lake 2 hours away, to fish off a quiet pier. We barely talked for the first hour. The water was flat as glass, and the air had that early edge that warns of colder days ahead. Eventually, Leon asked whether I had ever considered counseling on my own, not to fix anything, but to make sense of it. I told him I had started a few sessions with someone recommended by Attorney Sterling's colleague. I told him it had been useful to say the words aloud to a person who would not flinch or judge. He said that sounded like wisdom. In one session, the therapist asked me what I had learned about myself through all of this. I said I had learned that I can be steady in the face of betrayal, that I can choose patience over performance, and that I can hold my boundary without turning it into a weapon. She asked whether I had learned anything about love. I said love without truth is theater, and I was tired of performing. A few days later, I ran into Bethany at a grocery store. We made small talk near the produce section. She asked if I was all right. I said I was. She said Rochelle was trying, in her way, to become someone better. I told her I hoped that was true. Bethany said she wanted me to know that she had pushed Rochelle to tell the truth to Kendrick. She said Rochelle had resisted, then agreed. I thanked Bethany for being a decent sister twice over, once to Rochelle, once to me. On a Sunday morning, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. It was Kendrick, who said Rochelle had shared the broad outlines of what had happened, and that he appreciated hearing from me if I had anything to add that would help him make a wise decision. I told him he already had the facts. I told him the rest he would learn by paying attention to consistency over time. He thanked me and said he wished me well. Weeks turned to months, and the ache subsided like a bruise fading beneath skin. It did not disappear. It became part of my history, not my daily weather. I was grateful for the difference. One evening, I stood in my driveway and watched a thin line of geese stretch across the sky, headed somewhere warmer. I thought about movement and return, about how leaving is not always escape and arriving is not always home. On the first anniversary of the day, I saw Quentin's message. I drove to the lake again, alone, and sat on a bench. I did not mark the date with sadness or rage. I marked it by admitting that I had survived something I had not been sure I could survive with my integrity intact. An older man feeding ducks nodded at me, as if he knew why I sat where I sat. Maybe he did. That evening, I made dinner and took my plate to the living room and set it on the small table beside my chair. I turned on a record and let the sound fill the room at a comfortable volume. The quiet between songs felt like a friend. The second glass of wine tasted better than the first. I did not toast to the future. I did not need to toast at all. It is enough, sometimes, to sit inside a life that finally makes sense to you. Then came the unexpected call from Sabrina. She and the children were settled in Colorado. She said she had taken a position at a clinic that valued her and allowed her to be present for the children. She said they were finding their balance. She thanked me again, and I told her she did not owe me thanks. She said gratitude is not about debt. It is about acknowledgement. We wished each other well once more. Later that night, I opened my notebook and wrote a list of what I now considered non-negotiables, not for any future relationship alone, but for my own life. Truth first, then kindness that is not confusion with weakness, then boundaries that speak quietly but never lie, then laughter with people who have earned it. I closed the notebook and slid it back on the shelf. Leon called to say a few of the guys were getting together for a card night. Nothing wild, just familiar jokes and a pot of coffee that would go cold before anyone had the good sense to make a new one. I went and found my place at the table. I did not feel like a man recovering from ruin. I felt like a man who had refused to let ruin define him. The last trace of Rochelle in the house was a small plant she had placed on the kitchen windowsill, the kind of low-maintenance thing she said would make the room feel alive. It had withered during those weeks when I could not bring myself to care for anything. One Saturday morning, I replaced it with a new plant and watered it carefully. It is a small thing to keep something alive, but it is a declaration, too. Some afternoons, I still found myself thinking about how the first line must have felt to her, whether it pricked like a thorn or slid past without resistance. I learned not to live inside questions that would never have answers. I learned to notice the day in front of me instead. My name is Anthony Carter, and I am 46 years old. The fact of my name and age matters to me now because it anchors me to what is real. My work, my friendships, my quiet evenings, my own decency surviving what should have been enough to make it fade. I do not need to retell everything to myself to believe it happened. I have the lesson. Rochelle and I have not spoken beyond practical messages through our attorneys in a long while. We do not hate each other. We no longer belong to each other. That is what truth does when you let it finish its work. It makes room for honest endings and the beginnings that follow them, even if you do not go looking for those beginnings. Quentin tried to call once more months after everything was final. I let the call go. I did not need to hear apologies shaped as explanations. I did not want to offer absolution that was not mine to give. My peace does not depend on his remorse. It depends on my refusal to live a lie again, even a small one, even one that pretends to protect. Some nights, the chair creaks when I lean back, and I smile at the familiar sound. It is not the sound of settling for less. It is the sound of settling in. The house no longer argues with me. It is a place I care for and that cares for me in return, which is what a home should be. If a person asked me what I learned beyond the obvious, I would tell them this. The truth will not bargain. It will not reduce itself to make anyone comfortable. It will wait as long as it has to, and then it will arrive all at once. And when it does, the only power you have is how you respond. I chose to respond with a plan rather than a performance. I chose to document rather than dramatize. I chose to tell the truth to the person who needed it as much as I did. It did not make me a hero. It made me a man who refused to accept a life that did not honor him. In the end, there was no flare of triumph, no dramatic score, no audience to applaud. There was a clean decree, a house reclaimed, friendships renewed, a garden watered next door, and a record that played exactly the way it had always played. And there was me, a man who will not forget what it cost to return to himself, and who has no interest in paying that price again. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.